Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome, welcome. Let me just get the comments up here on my screen. There we go. So I am here to answer your questions. Just type the questions in the comment section. You see, we've got some people filing in here. Let me get some water. I just finished a 1-hour call with my voice school. So yes, so what I do, the call I just finished in my voice school, I actually work with everyone's voice, everyone who wants to sing. It's very interactive. This one is Q&A. If you want a situation where I actually work with your voice, check out voiceschool.com. You don't have to, because I will answer any and all questions you have here. One of the things that came up in the call is vowels and the improving voice. And here's something I find that's very, very common with singers where they're starting to work, they've worked through the beginning stages, the intermediate, and they're going into advanced intermediate into advanced. And it's this question of vowels. And what will happen is when we're first learning to sing, the struggle we often have is the body doesn't know about singing. What the body does know is shouting. Shouting is a hardwired survival mechanism. And when we shout, it's very loud. It takes a lot of energy. We can't do it for a long period of time, but we instinctively know how to do it. It doesn't have a lot of range, just kind of sits in one part of our voice. So when we begin to take our voice out of speech range and we go to these higher notes, the body says, well, higher notes, I don't know about the singing thing, but I do know how to shout. And so we begin to shout. And shouting is done on very, very wide open vowels. And there are acoustic things happening in a shout. But essentially, the lower resonance of the voice that's a little more predominant in your chest voice and lower register, what will happen is the body will try and push this lower resonance higher and higher and higher to hold this relationship. And the levers that the body has to push this lower resonance higher and higher is constricting the throat and really widening the mouth. So we get, we start to, hey, shout. So we learn when we start taking voice lessons, working on the voice, one of the first things we do is we break that coupling with things like or very closed vowels. And what that does is it really narrows the lips, that drops that resonance. And we'll even get the larynx down. So both of those drop that resonance low, so it breaks the shout reflex. But you don't want to get stuck there either, because you can't belt that. So what's going to happen is the vowels actually need to start opening up, but in a new way. So we were working on, had a very talented singer in there, have singers of all different levels in voice school, but we were working on starting to open the vowel now in a new way. So rather than the shout, and being stuck with we can start to feel one. So we keep the here, but a little more brightness in the vowel here. One, 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 one. One, 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 one. Right? I don't want to say one, but I don't want to go to ha. So it's one, 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 one. So it's new ways of working the vowels. Let me see, you've got some questions here. Anthony, how do you teach your students? Let's say hypothetically they come in and they want to sing like Robert Plant or David Coverdale, who tend to not fully enunciate their words. So look, so when you're and I'll talk about Robert Plant a little more than David Coverdale, because I've heard David Coverdale, but I'm more of a Zeppelin fan going way, way back. if anyone asks, my favorite album is Physical Graffiti. But Zeppelin, Robert Plant, right? He's coming from a very blues-based tradition. And Zeppelin kind of took the blues and then just really turned it just cranked up everything, and created like a hard rock version of the blues. So what you want to be able to do is have access to all of your range. You want to be able to control vowels. You want to be able to enunciate clearly if that's what you want to do. But then you set that aside and you start communicating. And Robert Plant was also communicating attitude. And a lot of what Led Zeppelin did, if you ask somebody to hum a Led Zeppelin song, they'll end up humming the guitar riff almost more than they'll hum the vocal hook, right? If you ask somebody, hey, sing Kashmir for me, they're going to go da-da-dan, 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 da-da-dan. That's what jumps into your head, not the vocal. So Robert Plant was he knew that these riffs were so strong, he created these almost ethereal textural vocals over the top of it. So yeah, you don't have to enunciate. There's working your voice, and then we get to material, and then we start exploring that and what we can do within the parameters of the material. And we want to do everything in as healthy a manner as possible. But sometimes, especially in the recording of a song, we'll push the voice. We'll even push the level of vocal health. One of my favorite vocals of all time is David Bowie, his song Heroes. And when he recorded that song, the producer for the beginning of the song had a mic very close to him. I wish I could swim like dolphins. Dolphins can swim. But then by the time it gets to the end of the song, the producer put a mic at the opposite end of the studio. And the mic had a gate on it, which means unless Bowie was at a certain level, the mic wouldn't open up. Nothing would be recorded. So for the last part of that song, it was, I will be king, and you, and he's shouting across the studio, and it just creates this really emotionally impactful performance. And Bowie is even out of tune on some notes, sharp, and it totally works because it's so raw and it's so emotional. It's perfect in its imperfection. But I don't know if you would want to sing 2 straight hours like that, right? You have to just kind of watch how far you're going to push the voice. You do whatever you need to do to get the recording, and then you have to just, when you're out on the road, you gotta have to be kind of careful with how you do that. So there's my answer. Jay, I struggle with singing mixed voice in G4 and above in a more adducted, more metallic sound, not falsetto. Can you recommend any exercises for developing this coordination? So what you want to do, what can often happen at above G4, right? It's this G above middle C, is the vocal folds need to stretch and thin for the higher pitches. Now, when they stretch and thin, we get less surface contact. And as we get less surface contact, we start to go more towards falsetto. And just kind of the outer covering of the vocal fold is vibrating. Yeah, so we're getting, let's say on this A4, right? And that's fine. But if we want more intensity, there are 2 factors that are going to increase the intensity. First is the sound wave itself. So the amount of contact the vocal folds have also ties in to the amount of closed quotient. And the closed quotient is the time the vocal folds stay closed as opposed to open. So in a falsetto, they're closing for a very short, relatively short amount of time, and then they're mostly staying open. Now, when the vocal cords are closed, what happens is there is a drop in pressure. There's an immediate drop in pressure in the vocal tract because you've cut off the air. And that drop in pressure then starts this oscillation of high and low pressures. It's like a weather system. And it's like wind. That's how wind is created, high pressure to low pressure. And so this energy is the sound wave. And the longer they stay closed, the more this energy is created. And also, the more air that's flowing through. We don't want too much air, but we don't want too little. We want this nice column of air. When you shut that off, there's a greater drop in pressure. There's more energy. Number 2 is the acoustics. What's happening as you tune the vocal tract? And so if the vocal tract is just kind of flabby and over-relaxed, over-closed, then you're not going to get a lot of energy in these upper harmonics. So what you want is you want more of a closed phase, and you also want more energy, the vocal tract bringing out, tuning the resonances to these higher frequencies. So what you can start to do is start to feel a little bit more of the closed phase and a little bit more of this energy, tuning the vocal tract to be a little brighter. So rather than we can start to feel a little more This is now starting to increase the closed phase. Hey! 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 Yeah! Sorry, I've been teaching an hour, but let me do it here. Supposed to, so start feeling what I would do. Let's do this. Take the exercises. First warm up. Now we're going to increase the closed phase. Good, 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 good. Now we're going to add a little bit of higher energy on that. Na 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 na. Start to give a little more press, right? A little more resistance. Just watch that you don't overdo it. This is where you want to be really, really careful. So I suggest as you go into this phase of your training, getting some guidance, either with a teacher or in a structured program. That's why the way I've set up voice school is it's not just, right? Because it's very easy to create courses and then just say, here you go. Here's a login. I'm done with you. Whereas in voice school, it's very interactive, and you actually get check-ins with my voice teachers, where anytime you're stuck, they'll get on with you and they'll guide you through this so you know what to work on. So get in some type of structured program or private lessons to walk you through that. Can you explain what this means? I've heard coaches describe the voice of Robert Plant. He's able to bend his voice to the notes of Jimmy Page's guitar. Yeah, so look, in blues, the beauty of blues is blues will bend traditional Western music. And in terms of melody and harmony, and blues blues does a couple of incredible things, right? Is we tend to have in music, right? We've got a 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, a 1 chord, and this 5 chord has this quality of being dominant. Without going too deep into the theory, you can hear that this really wants to resolve to here. And this 1 chord, right? But what blues will do is they'll put the dominant on the 1 chord. All the chords can be dominant. Whoa, so that starts to blur it. And then we have the major, right? What does blues do? blues will superimpose minor over the major. So Robert Plant hears this, and Robert Plant will blur on a major chord. He'll blur minor into major, right? And he hears the blue note, right? The blue note here over this major chord. Look, that's a tritone. That's not traditional Western theory. So it's just being really steeped in that music. It's amazing in the 60s. You know, this is the music that came from Africa and really gave us the birth of rock and roll. And then this music was transplanted over to the UK. And these young teenagers just started grabbing a great American blues artists and just eating it up. And then it came out in their own unique way. So that's the beauty of what happened there, especially the music coming from the UK, the 1960s into the 70s, and certainly the British invasion. It just got twisted through that culture in a new and unique way. So let me see. I have a female singer that's struggle. Oh, yeah. Okay, Max, let me see. I have a female singer that struggles to have a wanted flip from chest to head, like in the song Zombie by the Cranberries. How would you help her find it? Great. So, what a flip is a flip has two components to it. So just like the previous question, how do I sing these higher notes in a more intense way? We're going to go the opposite way. So what we want to do is we want to go the vocal folds from having more contact and staying closed longer to less contact and staying a little more open. And then the vowel component is we want to go from lots of energy in the upper frequencies to little energy in the upper frequencies. So the best way to facilitate this is through vowels. And what I would have your singer do is just work from ah to oo. Ah, ooh, ah, ooh, ah, ooh, ah. And if she has trouble with that, have her say ah, coo, ah, coo. From ah, like to coo, like a cuckoo clock. Cuckoo. And in however, wherever she finds it useful, she can say ah, coo, coo, ooh, coo, coo, ooh, coo, coo, ooh, and then then and then you kind of exaggerate the shift. And then the other thing is you give a little push of air on the top note. And you'll eventually start finding it and start finding the break, and then you really start to exaggerate the differences. So cool. All right. Any other questions? Since you got me here. A common theme when you hear me talk about the voice is vowels, vowels, vowels. Vowels, for me to focus on the vowel really helps you control other parameters of the voice that are harder to control. Very often when people are learning to sing, actually anybody who's singing, we sometimes find our larynx is creeping up a little bit and we start to find tension. Yeah? So what do? Well, we will, and this would make sense, we'll go directly to the problem. I've got to get my larynx down, right? I feel right here. Mom, ooh, I've got to get my larynx down. So we start to try and push it down. I remember even trying to hold my larynx, but it didn't really work. So the better, more, it's indirect, but it ends up being very direct, is think vowel. So watch, put your finger on your Adam's apple, on your larynx, say ah, uh, ah, uh. The will drop the larynx. Use the vowel to control the larynx. So rather than just mum, 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 mum. Oh, well, that was easier. So that the vowel becomes the controlling factor. The other thing is consonants can help as well. One of my favorite consonants is B, because put your finger again on your larynx and start making the B sound. B, b. Oh, it drops. And then one of my favorite vowels to put after the B, and if you are, this is easier for somebody who with an American accent versus other languages or even other dialects in English. But an American accent will tend to have some kind of like dopey low larynx sounds. And my favorite is B as in book, right? It's not book, it's book, book. And I'll have people, people from the UK, Australia, when they work with me, they'll sometimes say, hey, you're trying to make me sing in an American accent. And that's not it. It's, first of all, every language and every dialect accent within that language changes for singing. As a friend of mine dubbed it, you need to learn Singlish. So, but having this B, the will drop the larynx, and the B will drop the larynx. B. And I'm telling you, if as you're working your voice, if you find yourself straining on that exercise, I almost guarantee you, you're losing the vowel. You're going it's if you hold that you will be able to start vocalizing higher and higher. And then from the B, if you put a G on it, like good, you'll start getting a little more chord closure. These exercises are golden, man. I use them all the time. I've seen voice teachers say, don't use a G, don't use a hard G. I disagree to a point. I understand why they'll say it. Hold on, my mouth's just feeling a little dry. I understand why they say it. Because you can very easily overdo a G. You can make a G too hard. And if you start to you can start to squeeze at the vocal folds, right? The G is something you want to use carefully, but you can control how hard the G is. Look, I can go, that's too hard. Or I can go, so I'm getting that same action of my tongue, back of my tongue hitting my soft palate, but I'm doing it a little more gently. And that you can hear when I have the I'm able to access from my chest through my mix into my head voice. But when I add the G, now I'm able to do it and keep a little more intensity of vocal fold closure. And now you're really working into eliminating your break and really registering the voice. So these are very, very powerful exercises. How do you teach people to sing like seniors who naturally have a built-in little boy voice? For example, Phil Collins. Well, that's interesting. You bring Phil up. So one of my all-time favorite albums and yeah, I'm older and more so every day, is the Genesis album Seconds Out. It's a live album, and it's Phil Collins. He had recently taken over as lead singer, so it's early Phil Collins as a lead vocalist, and he's singing a lot of the material that they had done with Peter Gabriel. And Phil just has this beautiful, warm, lovely voice. Phil started getting a little harder and harsher with his voice when he did like Against All Odds and things like that. And I've just always just had this wonderful soft spot for Phil in that earlier period. That song, Follow You, Follow Me. Stay with me, I know my love. And Phil, I don't try and artificially make somebody's voice bigger. If somebody has, I really try and teach somebody to the instrument they have. But sometimes if we have a smaller voice, whatever our voice is, we will sometimes fall too far into that tendency. So if we have a bigger voice, we will sometimes try and make our voice over big, and we'll make it a little too shouty and too heavy. If our voice is smaller, we'll sometimes try and make it a little bit too light. So it's really just trying to find the fullness, the full measure of their voice and what the voice is really, really capable of. And the voice is an ever-changing instrument. Yeah. So what the voice is capable of at one age is different at another age. So it's where the voice is right now and what is the full expression of that voice. Very few of us ever find the true limits of our voice, right? We can always be expanding, and we're always changing and shifting with our voice as our voice matures and ages and does all of these things. So teaching people to naturally have a little built-in voice, to have that smaller voice, you're capable of that. It's just lightening the voice up. Again, there are three elements to a voice. There are three things. If we're gonna break everything down to first principles, right? If we take, I'll use a name that's rather controversial, but I'm just going to use it for an example. So Elon Musk, when he was thinking of doing SpaceX, he said to himself, okay, first principles, what do we know to be absolutely true? And so the very basic principles he looked at was, what are the elements necessary to make a rocket that you have to have? What do these elements cost? And when he added it up, he went, okay, rockets as they are cost way more than they should based on these first principles. What do we know to be true? So and then he went on to develop SpaceX. Your first principles of the voice, your very, very basic foundations, and the voice is infinitely complex. But when we get down to the bare bones of it, we have three elements. We have air, we have the vocal folds or the vocal cords, and we have the vocal tract. So I call it ACV, air cord valve. Everything is an adjustment of one or more of those three basic elements. So anytime you run into an issue, and this is something I also train voice teachers, and on Friday night, I am teaching a special master class for a group of voice teachers in Japan. So it's going to be their Saturday morning. I'm going to have an interpreter. It's a whole thing. But one of the main things I'm going to run with them is these three elements, right? When you're teaching, you're always boiling everything down to air, cord, vowel. Then you ask yourself, and you can do this with your own voice. Then you ask yourself three questions. What, why, how? What am I hearing? My voice is sounding a little strained. Why am I hearing it? Well, now this is where having some voice science, some understanding of the voice becomes really, really helpful. And so you can break down these three elements. Okay, what's going on? Well, I'm that strain. Am I pushing too much air? What is the air and cord relationship? Am I squeezing a little bit too much at the cords? Or is it enough air? And then what's happening with the vowel? Is my vowel a little too wide? What can I do? So I'm here. Mom, mom. Okay. So what I need to do is what I'm going to do is I definitely am squeezing at the vocal folds and my vowel is a little too open and I want to get a little more airflow. So how do I fix it? Well, I'm going to narrow the vowel. I'm going to get a little more airflow, a little less resistance at the chords. Coo, 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 coo. Coo, 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 coo. Good. I've eliminated that. Now, what am I hearing? Well, it's working, but it's a little light. So I'm going to stay with this vowel because the vowel's helping me find this register. But I want to get a little more chord closure, a little more resistance. So I'm going to add that G because I know that G is going to help me find a little more chord closure. And I'm actually going to open the vowel ever so slightly, oo to because I know that'll give me a little more a little more energy in the vocal tract. Well, how's that working? That's working pretty good. I'm going to stay with that a little while. So these are things that you can run yourself. Now, ultimately, this is what a voice teacher does. The voice teacher does all of that for you. So the value in a lesson is the real-time adjustment, right? The teacher is taking in this information, processing it, and handing it back to you. And that's the third part of my triangle is the consulting phase where they hand it back. And as they hand this back to you in real time, you should be feeling yourself getting closer and closer to an ideal vocal balance. And the reason you need to feel that is because until you experience vocal balance, it's very hard to know what it is. You can read about it, we can talk about it, you gotta feel it. That's why the call I just did for my voice school, I work with people's voices so they can actually experience it. Let me see, Jay, the phrase light is right, I think originates from SLS. In my interpretation, meaning that having the coordination and the placement right before adding pressure, volume, etc. When is starting heavier preferable? That's a great question, Jay. And like most maxims, right? Light is right is true to a point. And look, you're always going to work your voice lightly, right? What is the warm-up phase? The warm-up phase is not yelling as loudly as you can. The warm-up phase is doing things like really light. Look, I love, good friend of mine, Jamie Vendera, is connected with this. Dr. Vox. Jamie's a great voice teacher. So this thing, exercise I'll do. And that's really, really light. And what it does is it's just getting my voice balanced, getting my voice primed. Everything is ready. If you're yelling, yeah, that's what we don't want to do. So light works. But how do you know when to start working the voice? When is heavier preferable? So I want to exchange the word heavy for intensity because I don't want the voice to ever feel heavy. I know what you mean by that, but just for clarification for the call, just for me, I start thinking of it in terms of intensity. So what you start to do is as you increase intensity, well, we go back to air chord vowel. To increase intensity, it's a little more breath, a little more resistance, creates a little more energy in the vocal tract. And then the vowel starts to dial or give energy a little more to the higher frequencies in the voice. Because when we're here, that's great. Now look, I can increase the intensity of the air in the vocal folds, but ultimately that vowel's not serving me as I go to get louder. That's gonna have to start to the vowel's gonna have to start opening up as well. And so for you, as you work your voice, you need to know where the red line is. And the red line is where you start to feel excess tension, where you start to feel the shout mechanism kick in, right? You'll feel it. So you really need to develop, this is incredibly important for singers, is your mind-body connection and your mind-body awareness. And when you are practicing, I really encourage you. Well, first of all, I think mindfulness is something all singers should work on because it allows you in the moment to be very present with yourself. You know, and part of the mindfulness that I do, I use an app called Waking Up. I've tried some other mindfulness apps. This thing is light years ahead of everything. This thing is just like to the heart of the sun. It's amazing. But part of it is sitting still and just feeling the energy of your body. And you feel your body to the point where you don't feel toes and legs. You just feel energy. And then in this space, start to do things that you know aren't that hard for you. Okay, there's the energy. There's my body working well. There's everything in alignment. And then you can play with a little bit of negative practice. Negative practice is you touch on what's wrong so you can recognize it and then move away from it. So I start in a neutral, then I press the chords together too much, and I will cue myself with my hands, with my body. Then to feel this more open. Getting in touch with this. When you're in touch with your body, and you work this every day, and also doing mental practice, very, very powerful. As you increase this connection, then you're going to know when it's too much. But what I don't want you to do, and I see singers do this, is they take some lessons, they study for a little while, and they get stuck. And sometimes the getting stuck is starting to walk back to the danger zone. So I tell people, look, this is yelling and abusing your voice. You're falling off the cliff. So for a little while, we got to take a step back. But ultimately, you want to sing right there on the edge. That's where it's thrilling. That's where great singers sing. Look, there are some styles, and certainly within a song you maybe hear, but the money notes where people get really, it's right there. That's where the thrilling part is. And so it's finding your body, your connection, and knowing when you can touch those limits. Is it harder to teach a person who is a natural baritone to sing smaller or a natural falsetto to sing baritone? So that really is, it differs from person to person, but you've tapped into something really important here, Anthony, and that is all of our voices have a tendency. I remember way back in my SLS days, I actually was one of the people who was at the top level who would go around teaching other voice teachers. And we had a thing called tends to. My voice tends to do this. And so the tendency is very, very important. So yes, whatever your voice tends to want to do, if your voice tends to want to be shouty and heavy, then it's going to be harder for you to lighten that up. If your voice tends to want to be very light, then it's going to be harder for you to strengthen that. And what will often happen, especially if you're going to give me one voice that's harder than the other, the voice that tends to want to over muscle has some special challenges. And those challenges are just the whole nervous system. It's so used to feeling heavy, and the body so wants to get involved and overcompensate that being heavy is just a natural condition. And so those voices need to learn patience. And you may have to be in that overlight place for a period of time. Now, a voice that tends to want to be falsetto, the voice itself, I will argue, maybe I'll change my mind, but the voice itself tends to be a little easier to train because it's not tending towards being over heavy. But sometimes the kind of attitude, the personality type of that voice can be a little more reticent and a little more shy. And you know, to be a singer, you gotta have some swagger, you gotta have some bravado. Musicians will talk about lead singer disease, LSD, and sometimes they find singers a little aggravating because a singer's personality tends to be a little bolder, right? They're the front person, but it is a necessary part of being a singer. You're the one on the high wire. If the bass player hits a clam, yeah, you might pick it up, but it's usually it's band members. Band players love to bust each other and catch each other making a mistake. But that will be caught by some members of the audience, but it will be a good portion of the audience won't notice it. They may hear something's wrong, but they're not really going to clock what it is. But when a singer hits a clam, when a singer messes up the lyric of a popular song, when the voice cracks, when you're having pitch, the singer just everything, all the focus is on the singer. The way people listen to music is they tend to listen to the vocals take up the majority of their bandwidth, and then everything else kind of supports underneath. So the vocals are vitally, vitally important. And to be able to be in that spotlight, you've got to have that personality. And sometimes when someone's a little too reticent and shy, it's getting them out of that shell. You got to get out of that shell and really want to engage with your voice and take risks with your voice and allow yourself risk being wrong. All great singers crack. All great singers have clam notes. You can't be afraid of it. Someone I know wants to learn Class A country who tends to have a ton of yodels when they sing. How do you teach the right way to yodel so it doesn't strain your voice? So yodeling really in and of itself is the voice over letting go. So yodel by definition should not have strain in it. Yodel is actually a controlled crack. Ah, eh, yeah. But you'll notice yodelers, what vowels do they use to yodel? E and oo. Yodel, 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 ooh. E and oo. What they tend to do is E and oo, the resonances of the voice are a little more extreme. And so these extreme resonances tend to cause cracks, or if you want the crack, the yodel, they really help get that. What you want to watch in a yodel is when you're coming back down to the lower note, the strong chestier note, you don't slam that too hard. That's where the strain will normally be. You know, yodel-a-ya, you know, yodel-a, na-a, yodel-a, yodel-a. So it's not the yodel note, it's the note you're coming back into. Watch that those don't slam too hard. Garfield, hello. As a singing coach, what are my opinions on the singing styles of Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, and Sammy Davis Jr.? Friggin' amazing. I actually have a framed poster of the classic Rat Pack poster where they're all smoking their cigarettes and they're in their tuxes. So they obviously just finished a Vegas show. They all got drinks in their hands. And Dean is saying something and Frank and Sammy are laughing. They were just master technicians. Frank Sinatra is one of the greatest singers of all time, one of the greatest male vocalists of all time, and one of the greatest stylists of all time. And I also love Dean and Sammy. And Sammy had more range, arguably, than Frank. And Frank didn't really sing. You know, he classified himself as a baritone, this beautiful baritone voice. Where Frank was wonderful was his high notes. He knew to place just at the top of his chest, just into his transition, and he was wonderful on them. Frank didn't worry about belting out high C's. Frank knew what he did really, really well. Frank also had an absolutely beautiful voice that was bestowed upon him by nature, but Frank's sense of style is stunning. Frank's sense of time and rhythm and phrasing is just up there with anybody. He is at the top of that mountain. And if you listen to Frank sing, particularly the Nelson Riddle era, which I think, Frank in the 60s, try and sing along with Frank. You almost can't do it. Where Frank knows where he will hold back or he'll push. His sense, his musicianship, oh my gosh. And I'll tell you a story. So my first instrument was drums. And I played professionally. And I was very, very serious as a drummer. And I had the great, blessed fortune of studying with a gentleman named Freddie Gruber. And Freddie Gruber, he actually taught Neil Peart of Rush. Neil Peart took a year off to study with Freddie. Freddie he taught Steve Smith of Journey. And all these drummers would come by his house. And I remember, oh my God, I was a teenager and I was playing for Mitch Mitchell, Jimi Hendrix's drummer. And then Freddie had me play for Irv Cotler. And Irv was Frank's longtime drummer. And I'm playing for Frank Sinatra's drummer, which now I think back on it is pretty mind-blowing. I'd kind of forgotten about this until right now. But Irv told a story. And he had gotten some new cymbals. And so he put them on his kit, and they're in rehearsal. And he starts playing. And Frank immediately went, stop. And he turned around and looked at Irv and said, what did you do? What's changed? Frank heard the difference in the cymbals. The whole band's going, and Frank heard something different. His sensitivity and musicality was on that high level. Is it harder to teach people to sound like Frank Sinatra, Freddie Mercury, Robert Plant, or Hank Williams Sr.? You know what? It really depends on the person. There are people who are great impressionists. People tend to have an ear, but then there are also people who can sound. They just naturally sound closer to somebody, and that's just the nature of their voice. Listen, I love the group Yes. I love John Anderson's voice. John Anderson is a very, very different voice from me. John Anderson is very small. I am 6'7". I have a different vocal tract. I have different vocal folds. John Anderson sings, he is so at ease on these upper notes. It's very natural for him. His voice naturally sits higher than mine. Steve Perry is built very, very differently from me. I may have told this story before. I'm not trying to name drop because I don't know him, but I was grocery shopping, and my vocal studio used to be right next to the Gelsons on Coldwater and Riverside. That's in Studio City, Valley Village, Studio City. And I'm in that Gelsons, right? I'm literally right next door, just a wall separating our parking lots. And Steve Perry's pushing around a shopping cart, which just took a second for me to process that Steve Perry's grocery shopping, right? But he's small. He's not very tall. So his voice is naturally higher. He's just built very, very differently. So if you're looking to make somebody try and sing like someone else, that's just not what I do. I just try and teach somebody to really find how their voice functions best. And then if they want to use it to try and sound like somebody else, that's just not my expertise. So that's a long way of answering that question. Lady P, how do you improve the range of someone who is asthmatic? Voice gets stuck at S5. Steaming tends to help a bit out there, but seems to be a blockage. Needs a very long warm-up. That's interesting, okay? So number one, I want to talk about steaming versus nebulizing. You want to nebulize rather than steam. And there's a huge reason for this. Steam is good, but it doesn't really stick. What they did is they actually researched this, and they took a group of singers and they had them breathe very dry air from a tank, which dried out their vocal folds. And then they measured the amount, right? They scoped them. They look at the vocal folds to see how dry they were versus how moisturized they were. And they had them steam, helped a bit, and then they had them nebulize. And what they put in the nebulizer was saline solution. They tried regular water, sterilized water. They even tried Entertainer's Secret, I think, one of these throat sprays. And I will use some of these singer sprays, but this is more just, it's almost more for a mouth feel. The mouth is feeling a bit dry. That's not touching your vocal folds, right? You're not going to breathe that in. You're going to end up coughing. But this, because steam, if you put saline into a steamer, it's going to leave the saline behind when it creates the steam. This actually creates a mist, a very, very fine mist, and carries the saline with it, which is closer to your body's chemistry. And this stays on your vocal folds. Get a mesh nebulizer. Mesh nebulizer doesn't have to be expensive. You can get them for $40 on Amazon. I don't even have the name brand. They'll look sort of like this. It's a mesh nebulizer. You can get ones that plug in. If it uses batteries, keep it plugged in because they go through batteries like crazy, or they have ones that are rechargeable. Get this. Get the saline solution. It's really cheap. It's like $20 for 100 of these, and nebulize. Okay. Number two, if you're getting stuck at this F, it may not necessarily be the asthma. Now, the asthma may cause a swelling on the vocal folds if there's coughing, if there's stress, but it can do with just some vocal balance. I would on that F5. Right? That's pretty high, yeah, but I would work smaller sounds on that F5. So I'm going to go to the equivalent of the F5 for me, which is the C5. So if I'm having trouble getting this note, just touching it. Now, the vowel, I can't keep that ooh super closed as I go past this. Now I'm on the D5. If I keep it very closed, the resonances actually are too low. So I need to let this open a little. I have to start opening that. The vowel has to start to open. Let the mouth open. Drop the jaw. Start to open the mouth. You can even move the tongue slightly forward. So I would work on that and just starting to stretch and start working your way up in there. A technical aspect, I think Frank Sinatra sings technically, he sings beautifully for what he sings. Again, he doesn't take his voice very, very high, but he sings technically beautifully. Dean Martin sings, tends to have a little less range in where he's comfortable in his voice than Frank. Tends to keep his voice a little warmer. You know, Dean had a little more of that, kind of more of that type of sound. But technically, for what he's saying very, very well. Sammy was more of just an artistic, dynamic powerhouse. And so Sammy would sing a wider range of material. He'd push his voice a little harder. Honestly, I'd have to listen to Sammy. I haven't heard Sammy in a very, very long time. But from my memory, he sings technically really, really well. Listen, good vocal technique, it doesn't just fall into one pocket. I don't want people to think that there's only one right way to sing. In terms of vocal technique, it really has to serve you. And what you need from vocal technique is to be able to sing what you need to sing in a way that is repeatable, so you can do it again and again in as healthy a way as possible. That's it. So your vocal technique and your approach is going to be very different if you're Josh Groban versus Chris Stapleton. It's entirely different. And doing extreme vocal styles. Extreme vocal styles are not my specialty, but I know from the research that there are ways to do this in a healthy way. You are creating noise and distortion. Distortion is basically an irregular pattern, right? Pitch is a regular pattern. Is now there's an irregular pattern in there. And so that is something that something needs to rattle, something needs to create that. And rather than squeezing the hell out of your vocal folds, people will rattle the cartilages, the arytenoid cartilages in the back. They'll bring over the false vocal folds. They will create other ways of getting that distortion that doesn't create trauma at the vocal folds. You see, can I ask what my vocal range is? So my vocal range has kind of changed as I've gotten older, which is something I got to tell you, man, the voice and your journey with the voice, it can do your head in if you're not always working it and always being open and always being accepting of what your voice is, and then trying to be at its best. So I've gone from more of a tenor voice than a baritone tenor. I'm more of a baritone now. So I've and I will tell you, I've gone through some vocal challenges, and I went through a period of really extreme fast weight loss. I lost 160 pounds in 8 months, not through surgery. It was all through behavioral and diet, extreme change in diet. And in retrospect, I'm glad I lost it that fast for my health, because that kept me going. But man, it did a number on my voice. It created some intense vocal weakness. And I also have a slight neurological issue with my voice where it will tremor. And that actually has been an amazing gift. These issues have actually made me a much better singer because I've had to dig harder into my voice. So in terms of my range, I'm very comfortable. I mean, I can sing in lighter tones up to this G most days, the G5. I used to have the B flat 5 and even the C. It depends on how much I'm working my voice. But I haven't done a real that E2 is iffy. So maybe I'll give myself the F2. So a little over 3 octaves. Depends on the day. Oh my goodness, you have Irv Kotler's book. I've Got You Under My Skin, drummed for 20 years, now voiced for 10. Recently been working on Rat Pack materials, so much info in their expression. Yeah, Jay. Oh man, a fellow drummer. So I will tell you. So before I studied, this is just drummer talk, with Freddie Gruber, who you can look up. Yeah, one of the craziest evenings of my life was hung out with Freddie, Jim Keltner. If you know who Jim is, that song Dreamweaver, Gary Wright, who just passed away. Jim is the drummer on Dreamweaver. He was George Harrison's favorite drummer, just played on tons of stuff. Jim Keltner and Mitch Mitchell of Jimi Hendrix, and me. And we went to Roger Lynn's house, who had just invented the Lynn drum machine. That was just a bizarre evening. I'm just a kid hanging out with these guys. But before Freddie, I studied with Terry Bozzio when Terry was putting Missing Persons together. And so he needed some money. So I got lessons from Terry for about 9 months. Which was wild because he's one of my favorite drummers with Frank Zappa. Frank wrote the Black Page for him, etc. So cool. Hillary, good to see you, Hillary. Do you have any exercises to help singers hold notes like Frank Sinatra used to do? Yeah, so Hillary, a couple of things for holding notes. Number one is just making sure, so these three elements of the voice, the air, the chord, right, the resistance, the vocal folds, and the vowel, we really want to get those dialed in. So what I like to do, moving towards sustains and longer sustains, is we have to make sure that we have enough resistance at the vocal folds. So because if there's more air than resistance at the folds, you know, we're gonna run out of air really, really quick. So what you want to do is just start getting that vocal fold closure, and maybe do it a little bit in your lower range at first. So something like and just repeat it, right, on one breath. And so you're on that single breath, you're 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, hold. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, hold. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So this restarting, that's going to make sure you're getting that compression, that resistance. I love hard G's for that. Watch the G's not too hard. Go. Nope, we don't want tension here. And then you can start working your way up. So this is the top of my chest voice, just starting to touch my transition. And just feel that flow, right? Working on your air. Now look, sometimes when people run out of breath, they think I need more air. And what they'll do is they'll really try and fill their lungs with as much air as possible. Well, guess what? Your lungs are like a balloon. And when you overfill the lungs, there's a certain amount of elastic recoil. So now when there's too much air, you have stored energy that when you finally go to release it, your lungs are going to do this. And you're going to get this blast of air that's going to upset the balance of resistance. So we don't want too much air. When you breathe in, make it like a surprised breath, like you see a friend for the first time in a long time. Oh, hello. You run into him at the store. Hi. Oh, that's that little surprise. That's enough air. And then you kind of keep this attitude of the inhale as you exhale. And what that means is everything doesn't collapse. So this is supported. So you have a nice steady flow of air and then resistance to it. Humming is great for that. If you feel, if it's breathy, you're not going to be able to have the sustain because you're going to run out of air. Let's see. The little boy voice that vocal coaches will use. I don't know if I've heard of it that way, but I'm going to guess what they are talking about is they're almost talking about almost that kind of this little twangy cry. Huh? Oh man. You know, that type of voice. Yeah, it's kind of more of like a character voice. My teacher used to call it a puppet voice. And I use, Patrick and SpongeBob. Hey, SpongeBob. So you get your SpongeBob voice. And what that does is that's going to allow you, that's going to work some, what voice teachers will call twang in the voice. What you're doing is you're bringing some more energy into the voice and high frequencies. It's actually creating some narrowings in the vocal tract, actually in the upper throat, which are really, really good. Where we don't want to compress is here at the vocal folds. Your vocal folds actually sit rather low in your throat. They're down here. And we're creating the narrowings a little more up here. So this little, hey, nay, ha, and you can practice it on. And so you can, hey, 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 nay, 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 right? And you get that little, hey, hey, And then you can start to right? The Radiohead thing people are doing on TikTok. But that little twang, right? You start there. You could start to find more of the belt, but you need that twang in there. You need that energy. Lady P, yeah, I'm telling you, try the nebulizer. And it's interesting. So, in terms of male versus female, yeah? One of the theories they have, this can be more of an issue for female voices. And I have bulldogs. Bulldogs are they have a very short snout, right? Mush face, like a pug. And so they will tend to get phlegm. They will tend to get dry. And I will sit with my little Frenchie, Mr. Pickles, my French bulldog, and I'll just put this for him and let him just kind of breathe that if the air's kind of dry, so he's not quite as phlegmy. It's a shorter vocal tract, right? The male voice will tend to have a longer vocal tract. And the thought is that the longer vocal tract, there's more time and area, right? There's more of a trajectory for this air to become moisturized. Whereas in a shorter vocal tract, you're going to tend to have a drier voice. So the nebulizer can be very, very helpful. What is the hardest genre for you to teach when students come in? Country music, rock music, opera, or Broadway? So each genre has its own challenges, and then each genre is going to have easier and harder material that sits within that genre. So probably, and this is not my specialty, listen, I have worked with singers who have sung with Los Angeles Opera, who've sung with the Master Chorale here, who are session singers on classical soundtracks. Opera is difficult because opera has a very, very narrow aesthetic compared to other forms of music. There's kind of a way that you do it. Now there's freedom within that, but it is a very, very old art form, obviously. You don't write your own original songs for opera, right? And with your own kind of out there vocal sound. Okay? You're not going to go Tom York and of Radiohead and just kind of get real experimental, or Peter Gabriel in the opera world. You're following a pretty narrow track, and the average opera listener is a really refined listener. So opera's pretty freaking hard, and also the languages and all of that. And then within opera, there are certainly like roles. If you want to just talk in terms of like pure physical stamina, some of the Wagner roles are just brutal for how long the operas are and just where the tessitura, where the notes tend to sit. So if I had to rank, I would probably put that really high. Now jazz is an interesting one because jazz is, you can move keys around. You're not allowed to do that in opera, but man, jazz, you can shift keys to where it's comfortable for you. And depending on the style of jazz, if you're singing with a jazz trio as opposed to a big band, you don't necessarily need to be super belty, right? But your sense of style and your ear and your ability to interact with musicians is on a way different level than someone, right? You're singing in a pop band and the musicians are there and they're supporting you, but you're just really connecting with the crowd and you're kind of singing what it is that you do and everyone follows you. Jazz is deep in a different way. So they all have their challenges. And I'm sorry, my answer is kind of a non-answer, but they're really hard to rank, you know? But if I was going to put of the three you gave me, opera and then Broadway. Broadway is, now there are more rock musicals that exist now, the Green Day and everything. But Broadway, you're still following a track, right? If you are put into the Green Day musical, you still got to sound kind of like the cast album. If you're going to do Les Mis, right, you're going to sound a certain way. Javert's going to sound a certain way, and Jean Valjean's going to sound a certain way, and so there's a little less leeway. Country, man, there's a little more freedom, right? So look, if you're a great, amazing songwriter, and you can really connect with people, then in terms of like your vocal technique does not necessarily have to be at that level. In terms of current country, I think it's, for females, it's a little harder because they're always belting in their mix, whereas the male country singers, they get to sing a little bit lower. Right now, look, they got to get their sound, they got to get that right kind of twang, they got to get their style and all that stuff going, but the actual technical demands of the voice are maybe a little bit lower. None of these are easy, but yeah, there's my rough ranking. Listen, as the voice gets older, Anthony, the voice, the male voice, two things are going to happen. The voice will get, like the speaking pitch will tend to get a little higher because you begin to lose testosterone. And also the vocal folds get a little weaker and they lose a little bit of mass. But in terms of that giving them more range, you also start to lose flexibility and range as you lose that testosterone. So it's rare that somebody who's singing well and singing correctly, that if they're a true baritone, is going to morph into a true tenor. Someone who is a true tenor may start to be maybe a different type of tenor or lower tenor. Now, aging is a fascinating process. Aging affects everybody differently, right? I mean, if you look at somebody like a Rob Lowe is in his late 50s. But you look at some people in their late 50s, man, some of them, age is hitting them really hard because they have a different type of lifestyle. So all of these things that we've done in our life start to catch up with us. And then there's also genetics and all of these things. And it certainly applies to the voice as well. So why do a lot of vocal coaches on YouTube stress diaphragmatic support? So diaphragmatic support, this is a tricky one, yeah? Because there are areas of the voice that we don't fully understand. And the diaphragm is only a muscle of inhalation. When it's relaxed, it's up. It's like this dome-shaped muscle that basically bisects your body, yeah? And so when the diaphragm flexes, it drops and it pushes all your innards, and that's why you feel your tummy expand. You're not feeling your diaphragm. Your diaphragm's up here, right? You're just feeling everything it's pushing out of the way. And then all it's doing is going back to a relaxed position. So then there are voice teachers who will say, you don't sing from the diaphragm at all. But actually, the question is, and they're looking at how much can we control the diaphragm as it goes back to its relaxed position? How much conscious control do we have over that? What they're telling you with diaphragmatic support is it's also, there is support. And again, another part of this whole thing is the diaphragm goes back to this position, but that's not the only thing that presses out the air. When you breathe in, you have this expansion of the rib cage and into the lower back, and also these obliques, your abs, right? And the muscles wrap around you, right? Around the stomach. And so we have these muscles that then they also start to squeeze from the bottom. So that's also part of support. So this feeling of imagining it from the diaphragm, I think, is helpful for singers. And then what they're telling you to do is they don't want this whole thing to collapse, because then you don't have control of the air. Look, take the breath in, feel that expansion, and then on a hiss, keep that expansion open. Don't let the whole thing, you can feel. I tend to focus a couple inches below my belly button. Place your hand there, give a little cough. You feel a little muscle kick out. I tend to think of controlling my breath from there. Steven Tyler, listen, Steven Tyler is 75 years old. He's had an amazing career. He's certainly learned. He sings these songs really, really high. I just saw this morning that Steven Tyler, they've had to cancel some dates on the tour because he's had a vocal injury where he actually started bleeding. So I don't know what the story is with that. So I'll leave that there. I've never worked with Steven, so I can't really start to pick apart his technique too much. That's not something I don't want to be the armchair quarterback on specific people. Hillary, do I like V exercises for airflow? Yes, I absolutely do. V, Z, R, these are all semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. What you're doing is you're creating a secondary resistance that assists the vocal folds. I also love this thing. I don't get anything from promoting this, although I promote it so much I should reach out to them. I love this thing. It's called Dr. Vox, VOX. It's a little pricey for what it is, but it works really well. You put in varying degrees of water depending on the resistance you want, and just the water is going to give you the resistance like the V. So I love this thing. I also have voice straws. I've got this thing, which I love from the voice straw, where I can sing into this cup through a straw. Which is really, really helpful. I've got all kinds of gadgets here. If you saw the other view of everything that's around me. I mean, I've got all my like tongue models. I've got vocal tract models. I've got, oh my goodness, the larynx. Anyway. Yes, but do practice that ga and do your V's, Hillary. Do your V's, but as you do the V, right, I want you to pay attention to the vowel sound you're making under the V. Don't go, that's not going to do much for you. Think the, right? Like the. Make sure you got some resistance on that. And you can just do yes, it's not. Victoria, I've been trying to explain that properly. Okay, that was perfect. All right, I'm not sure what not sure what I said, but I'm glad it was perfect. Let me see. Thank you for answering my questions. Yeah, not a problem, Anthony. It's yeah, listen to singers and really listen, find ways to grow from musically. Increase your ability to listen. You should always be working on. Everybody who's serious about music needs to take time during the day, even if it's just a short period, and really focus deeply on listening. Music has really become this commodity where it's just all around us, right? We have Amazon Echoes that'll play anything we want. We have earbuds in our ears while we're doing everything. And we've kind of lost the ability to really sit and focus. And there was a study where they showed that people now are listening to music more than they ever have, but they're less and less emotionally connected to it. Don't lose that connection. Music's almost become too easy. And music you need to set time aside where music is precious. Oh, the diaphragm explanation. Oh, I'm glad that was helpful, Victoria. Everyone, thank you so much. Oh, wow. We've gone an hour and 20 minutes. This has been a lot of fun. We'll do this next week. So please come in and ask your questions. Let your friends know about this. I just enjoy helping people. This helps me just kind of keep a pulse on what people are wondering about voice. And so, yeah, I appreciate you being here, and we will talk soon. Bye-bye.